Today I'm going to talk to you about how to make a pastry which is gluten-free and low Fodmap. My name is Suzanne Pierazzini and I'm the author of 2 low Fodmap cookbooks, and I'm the creator of the Inspired Life Low Fodmap coaching program. Right, many of you like to cook, but the minute you find out that you have to go low Fodmap, which means you can't use wheat, barley and rye, you freak out because you can't do some of the basic baking that you've always enjoyed. Now that's just simply not true. I use a flour mixture which more or less equates a wheat-based flour. I use white rice flour, potato starch and tapioca flour. Now you could make that brown rice flour if you wanted to, or even mix 50-50. Now for 2 cups of flour, I make 1 1/3 cups of it the white rice flour, then 1/3 cup tapioca flour, and 1/3 cup is the potato starch. Right, so with all my recipes, I more or less work on those proportions. I mean, you can give or take a little bit and you're not going to have much of a difference. Now, a lot of people put gums into their gluten-free and low Fodmap baking, like xanthan gum or guar gum. I don't do that just because, even though it's not a Fodmap issue, some people do react to those gums. And most of the processed gluten-free food out there does include those gums because it holds the food together better. But if you make a good flour mix that includes something like tapioca flour, which when heated with liquid creates a kind of a gum anyway, then you won't have a problem with your food falling apart. Right, so let's get on to the recipe for the actual pastry. It can be a sweet pastry or a savory pastry. With a sweet pastry, you just add a little bit of sugar. I never add more than maybe a tablespoon of normal table sugar to it, just to sweeten it a little bit. Right, so these are my measurements for my basic pastry. 133 grams, which is 4.7 ounces of the white rice flour. 22 grams, which is 0.8 of an ounce of tapioca flour. And in this case, I've added a little bit more potato starch into it, and I've put 45 grams, which is 1.6 ounces of potato starch. Now it's only in the pastry that I change this balance a little bit. On top of that, I put a pinch of salt, and you put a pinch of salt in the sweet and the savory versions because the salt actually brings out the flavors. So it is just a pinch, we're not talking about a teaspoon here. Then the next ingredient is 100 grams or 3.5 ounces of butter and 1 medium egg. Now what I do to make it really simple is I put all the ingredients into a food processor. I do cut up the butter into fairly small pieces, but you want to keep it nice and cold. So I put them all into the food processor, and before adding the egg and the butter though, I normally just give it a whiz for the dry ingredients so that you're kind of blending all those flours together, and the salt and the sugar if you've got sugar in there. And then I add the butter and just whiz that around a bit just to break up the butter a little bit, and then I add the egg and process that. But if you're in a hurry, throw everything in and you're going to get a dough anyway. Now, depending on the size of your egg and also the quality of your flours, this might be a little bit too wet or a little bit too dry. So you do have to adjust that. If it's too dry, just add a little bit of water. If it's too wet, add some more white rice flour until it forms the sort of dough that you expect to get for a pastry. So then you remove it out of the processor, and I get my tart dish ready and I butter it or oil it, and then I press the pastry out into it. I don't even try to do anything like rolling the pastry because remember, this doesn't have gluten in it that holds it really firmly together. I press it out into the tart dish And then I pop it in the fridge for 30 minutes just to kind of firm it up a bit. Meanwhile, I've preheated the oven to 180 degrees centigrade or 360 degrees Fahrenheit. And I put baking paper on top of the base of the tart, on the pastry, and I fill it up with rice or dried beans, or you can get cooking beans, which is what I have, and I blind bake it for 15 minutes. Then I remove the paper and the beans or the rice, and I cook it for another 10 minutes, just to get it a little bit brown or a little bit more crispy on the outside. And at that point, I put in my filling. In this case, I was doing a blueberry sour cream tart, and you can see the images of that. And the filling doesn't need to be cooked. So that gets put in after the pastry is completely cooked, and then you put it in the fridge to set. And this makes a delicious dessert for your family or even for friends who come around. If it's more of a savory dish where something needs to be cooked in the oven, then I wouldn't do that last 10 minutes. I'd do just the 15 minutes of blind baking, put the filling in, and then put it into the oven, and the pastry will cook alongside the filling at that stage. All right, I hope that makes the process of making a pastry a little bit simpler. This pastry stays together beautifully. You can take the tart out of the container with no trouble at all and place it on a serving dish. Right, if you haven't already, you could subscribe to my channel. And if you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up or even leave a comment with your own experience with pastry. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.